For 15 years, I had dreamed of this moment, standing on 30 acres of rolling grassland that belonged to me, watching the sun climb over distant hills that marked the edge of my property. The morning dew sparkled across the field like scattered diamonds, and the air carried the earthy scent of fresh soil and wild grass. All my life I had been trapped in concrete and cubicles, saving every spare dollar toward this single purpose: to own a piece of land where I could build a small ranch and live according to my own vision. The real estate agent had called it a unique opportunity: 30 acres situated at the border between rural farmland and an expanding suburban development called Vista Ridge Estates. The price had been steep but fair, considering the proximity to town amenities while maintaining enough distance for proper ranching. I had emptied my retirement accounts and taken a second mortgage to make it happen, but when I signed those final papers, a weight lifted from my chest that I had carried for decades. Moving day arrived with perfect weather. The truck rumbled down the long gravel driveway, sending dust clouds billowing behind it. My modest ranch house stood waiting, nothing fancy, just a solid three-bedroom structure with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. Behind it, the weathered red barn needed some repairs but remained structurally sound. The fences required work, and the old corral needed rebuilding, but these projects did not intimidate me. They represented freedom, the freedom to shape my own small corner of the world. Several neighbors arrived throughout that first day, bearing welcome gifts and offers of assistance. The Johnsons from the cattle farm to the east brought a homemade apple pie. Old Mr. Reeves, who owned the adjacent hayfield to the north, stopped by with a bottle of whiskey and stories about the property's history. Even a few residents from Vista Ridge Estates wandered over with curious smiles and friendly introductions. All except one. She arrived in the late afternoon, parking her gleaming white SUV precisely at the edge of my driveway. She wore cream-colored slacks and a powder blue blouse despite the dusty surroundings, her blonde hair styled in a perfect shoulder-length cut that did not move even in the breeze. Her smile remained fixed in place as she approached, clipboard in hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I am Barbara Wilson, president of the Vista Ridge Homeowners Association." Her eyes scanned my moving boxes, the tractor parts on the porch, the rolls of fencing material stacked by the barn. I wanted to personally deliver our community standards handbook and review a few compliance issues before you get too settled. I wiped my dusty hands on my jeans before accepting the glossy folder she thrust toward me. "Nice to meet you, Barbara. I appreciate the welcome, but I am pretty sure my property sits outside your HOA boundaries." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We consider all adjacent properties part of our greater community, whether officially within our jurisdiction or not. Compliance with our aesthetic standards benefits everyone's property values." She gestured toward the fields beyond my house. "That will be especially important when you begin landscaping this open space." I nodded politely but felt the first twinge of unease. "I will not be landscaping much. This is going to be a working ranch. Small scale, of course, but with horses, chickens, maybe a few goats eventually." Barbara's smile vanished entirely for a moment before she forced it back into place. "I see. Well, do review our materials. We should discuss appropriate fencing options and animal limitations before you make any permanent decisions." She handed me her business card. "Call me when you have questions." She did not say if, she said when. After she left, I tossed the folder onto my kitchen counter and returned to unpacking. The following week passed in a blur of setup and organization. I repaired sections of fencing, cleaned out the barn stalls, and prepared the chicken coop. Each task brought me closer to the vision that had sustained me through years of office drudgery. Then came the day my first animals arrived. Two quarter horses, a chestnut mare named Penny, and a bay gelding called Dusty, stepped cautiously from the trailer, their ears flicking as they surveyed their new home. The chickens came next, a dozen Rhode Island Reds that immediately began scratching and pecking at the ground of their spacious run. Standing there watching them explore their new home, I felt a contentment that had eluded me my entire adult life. That evening, I found a flyer tucked under my windshield wiper. Notice of community standards violation, it proclaimed in bold red letters, followed by citations about unauthorized livestock and unapproved agricultural activities. At the bottom was Barbara Wilson's signature and phone number. I crumpled it up and tossed it away, chalking it up to an overzealous neighbor who did not understand property boundaries. Little did I know that single paper represented the first shot in what would become an all-out war for my right to live on my own land. The notices began appearing with alarming regularity. Every few days, I would find a new one, sometimes taped to my mailbox, sometimes left on my porch, occasionally wedged beneath my truck's windshield wiper. Each one cited different violations of rules that held no legal authority over my property: unapproved fence height, non-compliant outbuilding color, excessive animal odors affecting neighboring properties, unauthorized agricultural activities in a residential zone. At first, I ignored them. My land, my rules. But after 2 weeks of escalating notices, I decided to verify what I already knew. The county record's office was housed in a squat brick building downtown, staffed by a helpful older woman named Margaret who guided me through property maps and zoning documents. "See here," she pointed to the boundary lines clearly marked on the official county survey. "Your parcel sits entirely outside the Vista Ridge Estates development and their HOA jurisdiction. You are zoned agricultural residential, which permits small-scale ranching operations." She peered at me over her reading glasses. "Are they giving you trouble already?" I showed her the stack of violation notices. Margaret sighed and shook her head. "That Barbara Wilson has been pushing those boundaries for years. Watch yourself. She does not take no for an answer." Armed with copies of the official property maps and zoning documents, I returned home determined to put an end to the harassment. The opportunity came sooner than expected. As I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, I spotted Barbara standing at my front fence with a measuring tape and camera. She wore gardening gloves that looked as if they had never touched soil. I stepped out of my truck and approached her. "Can I help you with something, Barbara?" She turned, not the least bit embarrassed at being caught trespassing. "Your fence exceeds our height regulations by 8 inches. I am documenting the violation for our records." "Barbara, we both know my property sits outside your HOA boundaries. I checked the county records today." I held up the folder containing the official maps. "These fences are fully compliant with county agricultural zoning requirements." For a moment her pleasant mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed and genuine anger flashed across her face. "The aesthetic integrity of our community affects all surrounding properties. Your ranch is visible from several Vista Ridge homes." "That may be true, but your HOA rules do not apply here. Legal boundaries exist for a reason." Barbara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a cold, controlled tone. "This land was supposed to be Phase 3 of our development. Vista Ridge had plans for 28 luxury homes on this parcel before you swooped in and purchased it privately." Her perfectly manicured finger jabbed toward my pasture. "Those horses should be premium homes generating tax revenue and HOA dues, not creating odors and noise that devalue our existing properties." The truth emerged at last. This was never about compliance or community standards. This was about thwarted expansion plans and lost profits. I purchased this land legally, Barbara. It is zoned for agricultural use, and that is how I intend to use it. Her smile returned, but it did not reach her eyes. We shall see about that. Vista Ridge has significant influence in this county. Your little hobby farm is an eyesore that affects dozens of homeowners. The needs of the many outweigh the desires of one, do they not? After she drove away, I immediately installed security cameras around my property. Something in her tone suggested this confrontation marked a beginning, not an end. My instincts proved correct that very night when, reviewing the security footage, I watched Barbara return during dinner time. The cameras captured her methodically photographing every corner of my property, measuring fence posts, peering into my barn, and making notes on her ever-present clipboard. The threatening letters began arriving the following week. No longer mere notices. These came on official-looking letterhead warning of legal consequences and forced compliance measures. One mentioned potential condemnation proceedings if multiple violations remained unaddressed. My nearest neighbor, Mr. Reeves, stopped by one evening as I repaired a broken fence post. Saw Barbara Wilson's SUV parked at your gate earlier. That woman has been a thorn in the side of every property owner who does not fit her vision of suburban paradise. She seems unusually fixated on my place, I admitted. The old man nodded grimly. The Henderson family that owned the farm 2 miles south, their place suddenly had code violations they could not afford to fix. The Whitakers found their water access mysteriously restricted. Both eventually sold to Vista Ridge developers at below market value. He leaned on my fence. Barbara has a way of making problems for people who stand in the way of what she wants. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by property documents, violation notices, and legal warnings. The horses nickered softly in the barn, while the distant lights of Vista Ridge estates glowed on the horizon like an advancing army. I had sunk every dollar I had into this dream. I could not afford legal battles or prolonged harassment. But I also could not afford to give up. This land represented everything I had worked for. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I realized this was no longer just about zoning or fences or horses. This was about whether one person with power and connections could bully another person out of their legally owned property. I would soon discover that the battle had only just begun. The rumble of unfamiliar vehicles on my gravel driveway roused me early one Tuesday morning. Through the bedroom window, I spotted 2 white trucks with the county animal control logo emblazoned on their doors. A knot formed in my stomach as I quickly dressed and hurried outside. 2 officers stood by the horse paddock, clipboards in hand. "Good morning. We received multiple reports of malnourished horses and unsanitary conditions. We need to conduct an inspection." My first impulse was anger, but I swallowed it down. "Of course. Please feel free to inspect the entire property. The animals are all properly cared for." The senior officer, a weathered man with sun-creased skin who introduced himself as Jim, conducted a thorough examination. He checked feed quality, water cleanliness, shelter conditions, and the health of each animal. As we walked, his initial professional distance gradually warmed. "Previous ranch experience?" he asked as he noted the properly mucked stalls and well-organized feed room. "No, but I spent 3 years researching and taking classes before purchasing this place." Jim nodded approvingly. "It shows. Contrary to the reports we received, this is one of the best-kept small ranches I have inspected this year. Your animals are in excellent condition." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by suspicion. "May I ask who filed these complaints?" "Anonymous," he replied, but his expression suggested he had his suspicions. We get a lot of those from this area lately. As the animal control trucks pulled away, I noticed a white SUV parked just down the road. It disappeared around the bend moments later. Barbara Wilson had been watching, waiting to see if her tactic would succeed. Her failure apparently only intensified her resolve. The following days brought new forms of harassment. Cars with Vista Ridge parking stickers began driving slowly past my property at all hours, passengers openly taking photos of my home, my animals, my daily activities. When I waved, they quickly accelerated away. My phone started ringing with blocked numbers. The callers never identified themselves, but their messages carried unmistakable threats. Accidents happen on poorly managed ranches. You would be much happier somewhere more rural. It would be a shame if something happened to those beautiful horses. When I visited the hardware store to purchase supplies for barn repairs, the owner, Dave, with whom I had previously shared friendly conversations, suddenly seemed uncomfortable. "I am sorry," he said, avoiding eye contact. "We cannot deliver those fencing materials as promised, scheduling issues." "Is everything okay, Dave?" I asked, sensing there was more to the story. He glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "Look, I have got a lot of customers from Vista Ridge. They are saying things about your place, health hazards, illegal business operations, noise complaints. I cannot afford to lose their business." The pattern repeated itself throughout town. At the feed store, prices mysteriously increased for my orders only. The local diner fell silent when I entered, whispered conversations resuming only after I sat down. Even the veterinarian who had eagerly accepted me as a new client suddenly had a full schedule when I called for routine vaccinations. Barbara Wilson was systematically isolating me, turning the community against a newcomer they barely knew. The strategy culminated one Saturday afternoon at the local grocery store. I had just filled my cart with supplies when Barbara appeared, blocking the aisle with her own cart. Two other women from Vista Ridge flanked her like lieutenants. "Ladies, this is the person I was telling you about," Barbara announced loudly, drawing the attention of other shoppers. "The one destroying our neighborhood property values with that petting zoo." Her voice carried through the store. "Did you know horses can carry diseases transmissible to humans? And the waste runoff threatens our groundwater. My husband's cousin is a doctor and he says—" "Excuse me," I interrupted firmly. "Everything on my property is legal, properly maintained, and regularly inspected. If you have concerns, the appropriate channels exist to address them." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "We have tried appropriate channels. You ignore our notices. You refuse to comply with community standards that protect everyone's investments. Do you have any idea what your selfishness is costing your neighbors?" Other shoppers had stopped to watch the confrontation. Some looked sympathetic to my plight. Others clearly recognized Barbara as the HOA president and nodded along with her accusations. "My property is not within your HOA jurisdiction," I stated clearly, hoping others would hear. "The county has confirmed this repeatedly." Barbara smiled thinly. "Legal technicalities do not change the fact that your eyesore affects all of us. Perhaps if you cannot afford to maintain proper suburban property, you should consider selling to someone who can." The suggestion hung in the air, her real agenda finally spoken aloud. Several onlookers shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing the intimidation tactic for what it was. I abandoned my shopping and left, seething with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Driving home, I tried to process what was happening. This was more than neighbor disagreement. This was a calculated campaign to drive me off my land. The final straw came that evening. Returning from an emergency feed run to a store in the next county over, I discovered my mailbox had been knocked over, its post splintered. A handwritten note had been taped to the damaged box. "So sorry about your accident. Perhaps you should consider a more durable installation that complies with community standards." Standing there in the gathering dusk, surveying the deliberate damage to my property, something shifted inside me. Fear and frustration gave way to resolve. If Barbara Wilson wanted a fight, she would get one. But first, I needed to understand exactly who and what I was fighting. The alternating flash of red and blue emergency lights painted my barn walls in surreal patterns as I turned into my driveway after a supply run to the neighboring county. Two police cruisers sat parked in front of my house, their doors emblazoned with the county sheriff logo. Beside them stood Barbara Wilson's white SUV. My heart hammered against my ribs as I parked and stepped out. Three uniformed officers stood near my horse paddock, clipboards and cameras in hand. Barbara stood slightly apart, arms crossed over her chest, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. The senior officer, a stern-faced man with a salt and pepper mustache, stepped forward. "We have received a report about unauthorized commercial activities on this property. Are you the owner?" Before I could answer, Barbara interjected. "This person has been operating illegal ranch tour and a horse riding business without proper permits or inspections." Her voice carried the confidence of someone with authority. "We have documented multiple violations of county zoning ordinances." The officers looked at me expectantly, their expressions professional but skeptical. I took a deep breath. "I am the legal owner of this property, and I am not operating any business here. These are my personal horses and chickens on land zoned for agricultural use." "We will need to see your property documentation and any permits," the officer stated. Time seemed to slow as I walked to my office to retrieve my carefully organized paperwork. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the property deed, zoning verification, agricultural exemption paperwork, and animal permits. Years of corporate work had taught me the value of meticulous record-keeping, and I had anticipated potential challenges when establishing my ranch. Outside, I spread the documents across the hood of my truck. The fading afternoon light cast long shadows as the senior officer reviewed each paper carefully. Barbara hovered nearby, her confidence visibly wavering as the inspection continued. "These all appear to be in order," the officer finally stated, looking up from the paperwork. "The property is indeed zoned agricultural residential, which permits personal livestock." He turned toward Barbara with an unreadable expression. "Ms. Wilson, you reported commercial activities specifically. Do you have evidence of paid ranch tour or riding lessons?" Barbara's composure slipped momentarily. "There have been multiple visitors to the property, vehicles coming and going at all hours." "Those were friends helping me establish the ranch," I explained. "No money has changed hands. No business operates here." The senior officer nodded and passed my documents back. "Everything appears legitimate from our perspective." He glanced at Barbara. "Ms. Wilson, making false reports to law enforcement is a serious matter." Barbara straightened her spine. "I reported what concerned residents observed. If there has been a misunderstanding, I apologize." Her tone conveyed anything but regret. As the officers prepared to leave, the youngest of them lingered behind for a moment. "Just so you know," he said quietly, "this is not the first call we have responded to based on her complaints against neighbors. Document everything." He nodded meaningfully at my security cameras before rejoining his colleagues. After the patrol cars pulled away, Barbara remained, her eyes cold despite the pleasant smile fixed on her face. "This is not over," she said simply. "A properly maintained suburban community has no place for livestock and agricultural eyesores. Your presence here diminishes the quality of life for dozens of families." "My property, my rights, Barbara. Legal boundaries exist for a reason." She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Oh, you have no idea how the system really works in this county." With that cryptic warning, she returned to her SUV and drove away. That night, unable to sleep, I began researching Barbara Wilson online. Her LinkedIn profile listed her position: Senior Zoning Administrator for the County Planning Department. My blood ran cold as the implications sank in. Barbara was not just an overbearing HOA president. She held actual regulatory power within the county government. Further searching revealed her name on permit approvals for all 3 phases of Vista Ridge Estates development. She had served on the county zoning board for 15 years. Her husband owned a real estate brokerage that handled most Vista Ridge property transactions. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was not just fighting a nosy neighbor. I was battling someone with actual regulatory authority and institutional knowledge of how to manipulate the system. Someone who could potentially influence inspections, delay permits, and create bureaucratic obstacles I had never anticipated. This explained her confidence, her persistence despite clear legal boundaries. Barbara Wilson straddled 2 worlds, HOA president and county official, using the power of each to reinforce the other. No wonder previous property owners had capitulated and sold their land. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, surrounded by printouts of Barbara's connections and influence. The horses nickered softly in the barn as first light crept across my fields. Everything I had worked for hung in the balance. But now, at least, I understood the true nature of my opponent. Knowledge was power, and I needed to gather more of both if I hoped to protect my dream. The documents and maps spread across my kitchen table told a disturbing story. For 3 days, I had immersed myself in research: county records, property transfers, zoning changes, and permit applications. Colored pins marked a large county map, indicating properties that had changed hands under suspicious circumstances over the past 5 years. A pattern emerged, impossible to ignore. Every property adjacent to Vista Ridge Estates that had been absorbed into the development shared a similar history. Initial resistance by the owner, followed by a period of complaints and citations, culminating in a sale to Vista Ridge developers at below market value. I needed to connect with others who had experienced this pattern. My first call was to Bill Henderson, whose family had owned a small farm south of my property until 2 years ago. Now in his 70s, Bill agreed to meet at a diner in the next county over "somewhere Barbara and her friends do not go," he specified. Bill arrived leaning on a cane, his weathered face a map of hard work and harder decisions. Over coffee, he shared his story. "Been farming that land for 40 years, he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Then Vista Ridge goes up, and suddenly my tractors are too loud, my fields are unsightly, my irrigation is supposedly contaminating their precious groundwater." "Barbara Wilson?" I asked. Bill nodded grimly. "She started showing up at zoning meetings opposing my permit renewals. My equipment shed suddenly violated setback requirements that had never been an issue before. Water rights I had held for decades were challenged. The final straw was when they rerouted the county drainage during road improvements. My lower 40 acres flooded with every heavy rain. Engineer said fixing it would cost more than the land was worth. So you sold. Did not have much choice. Farm was losing money with those 40 acres unusable. Vista Ridge offered cash, less than market value, but enough to retire on. Now there are 6 houses sitting on land my granddad plowed. He stared into his coffee. Never felt right about it, though. Over the next week, I connected with 4 other former landowners with similar stories. Each had faced escalating harassment, mysterious permit problems, and eventually, financial pressure that made selling the only viable option. All roads led back to Barbara Wilson and Vista Ridge developers. My kitchen became headquarters for an informal alliance of victims and concerned neighbors. 5 of us gathered around that same map, sharing stories and connecting dots. Ryan Miller, who still owned land to the west, brought county tax records revealing that 3 separate parcels absorbed into Vista Ridge had faced similar campaigns of intimidation. Look at the timing, Ryan pointed out. Complaints begin, 6 to 8 months of escalating pressure, then the sale. Always to the same development company, always below assessed value. Janice, a former county clerk who had retired the previous year, slid another document across the table. This might explain why. I always thought these payments were suspicious. The paper showed consulting fee payments from Vista Ridge Development Corporation to Barbara Wilson, separate from her county salary, totaling over $80,000 in 3 years. Is that legal? I asked. Janice shrugged. Gray area. She disclosed the relationship as required, but the specific services rendered are vague. Zoning consultation could mean anything. We were connecting the final dots when my doorbell rang. A woman in her 30s with a laptop bag slung over her shoulder stood on my porch. Sarah Mitchell, Oak County Herald, she introduced herself, extending her hand. I am researching a story on aggressive HOA boundary expansion and heard you might have information. I hesitated, weighing the risks and benefits of media attention. How did you find me? Anonymous tip. Someone suggested your situation exemplifies a pattern affecting multiple properties around Vista Ridge Estates. I decided to take a chance and invited her in. For the next hour, our group shared documentation, patterns, and personal experiences. Sarah took notes and photographs of our evidence wall. This is more significant than I initially thought, she admitted as she prepared to leave. If what you are showing me is accurate, this represents a systematic campaign using both HOA pressure and potential abuse of county position to acquire targeted properties. That evening, as my new allies departed with plans to gather more evidence, my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. $500,000, a male voice stated without introduction. Double the market value for your property. Cash deal, no questions asked. The voice was professional, matter of fact. This offer would solve all your problems immediately and provide you with a significant profit. My heart raced at the figure, far more than I had paid for the property, enough to buy an even larger ranch elsewhere and still have money left over. Who is this? I asked. A representative of interested buyers. This offer expires in 48 hours. After that, we cannot guarantee such favorable terms. The implied threat hung in the silence. I will consider it, I replied noncommittally before hanging up. I stood in my kitchen, staring out at the sunset, painting my fields in gold and amber. The horses grazed peacefully, unaware that their home was being contested. The chickens had settled into their coop for the night. Everything I had worked for surrounded me. Taking the money would be the easy path, the smart path, perhaps. I could start over somewhere else, somewhere without Barbara Wilson and her network of influence. But this was no longer just about my ranch. The documents spread across my table revealed a pattern of intimidation and potential corruption that had victimized others before me and would claim more victims after I was gone. This had become about something larger than property lines or zoning regulations. This was about justice for an entire community under siege from corporate greed disguised as neighborhood standards. I picked up my phone and called Sarah Mitchell at the newspaper. "I am ready to go on record," I told her, "and I have decided not to sell. This cease and desist letter formally demands that you, Barbara Wilson, and the Vista Ridge Homeowners Association immediately discontinue all harassment, intimidation, and interference with my client's lawful use of their property." My attorney, Alina Simmons, read aloud from the document as she stood in my living room. A silver-haired woman with steel in her eyes, Alina had built her reputation defending small property owners against corporate interests. She had agreed to take my case after reviewing our evidence. "We have documented 18 separate incidents of harassment, trespassing, and interference," she continued, sliding the document into an envelope. "This letter puts them on notice that we are prepared to pursue civil action if the behavior continues." Later that afternoon, my security cameras captured Barbara tearing the notice from her front door, reading it with increasing agitation, then furiously stomping on it in her immaculate front yard. The footage would make valuable evidence of her state of mind. The next phase of our plan unfolded at the county administration building. Alina and I, accompanied by Bill Henderson and 2 other former property owners, requested a meeting with the county commissioners. To our surprise, all 3 agreed to hear us. "We have evidence suggesting that a county employee has potentially abused their position for personal financial gain," Alina began, her voice steady and authoritative. She methodically presented our documentation, the pattern of harassment, the consulting payments from developers, the targeted properties that eventually sold below market value. Commissioner Jackson, a veteran public servant nearing retirement, studied the materials with increasing concern. "These are serious allegations against a long-term employee. We will need to refer this to the Ethics Committee for formal investigation." "In the meantime," Commissioner Lowell added, "perhaps Ms. Wilson should recuse herself from any matters involving properties adjacent to Vista Ridge Estates." It was a small victory, but an important one. As we left the building, Sarah Mitchell from the Oak County Herald was waiting. Her front-page story ran the following day: "HOA boundaries or boundless power. Property owners allege pattern of intimidation." The article featured satellite images with property lines clearly showing how Vista Ridge had expanded beyond its original boundaries, absorbing previously independent properties after campaigns of harassment. Barbara's response came swiftly. A formal letter from the Vista Ridge HOA demanded a retraction of false and defamatory statements and threatened legal action against both me and the newspaper. Sarah Mitchell remained undeterred, publishing a follow-up article detailing the consulting payments Barbara had received from developers. Public opinion began to shift. Comments on the newspaper's online articles expressed outrage at the tactics described. Former victims of similar pressure contacted the paper with their own stories. The narrative was changing from a private property dispute to a potential abuse of power. My next move was bolder still. I organized an open house at my ranch, inviting neighbors from the surrounding area, including Vista Ridge residents, to visit and see for themselves the truth behind the rumors. Social media and local bulletin boards carried the announcement: "Community Ranch Day, Meet the Animals, tour the grounds, free refreshments. The day dawned clear and bright. By mid-morning, cars lined my driveway and the road beyond. Families with children eagerly visited the horse paddock and chicken coop. I gave tour of the barn and answered questions about small-scale sustainable ranching. Several Vista Ridge residents admitted they had been told my property was unkempt and potentially hazardous. Allegations they could now see were unfounded. We had no idea it was so well maintained. One woman confessed as her children fed carrots to the horses. The HOA newsletter made it sound like some kind of junkyard with dangerous animals. From across the road, Barbara watched the proceedings, her white SUV parked just off my property. I could see her on the phone, gesturing angrily as she paced back and forth. The consequences of that call arrived midway through the event. Fire marshals and health inspectors appeared, clearly responding to complaints about overcrowding and unsanitary conditions. They looked embarrassed when they found nothing to cite, just a well-organized community gathering with proper facilities and safety precautions. As the last families departed, thanking me for the educational afternoon, Barbara approached from across the road. Her face was tight with barely controlled fury. "You think this changes anything?" she hissed, unaware of the security camera recording her every word. "One little publicity stunt does not erase the damage your ranch does to our community image." "The community seems to disagree," I replied calmly. "Many of your own HOA members enjoyed themselves today." She stepped closer, prodding my chest with one manicured finger. "I have processed permits in this county for 15 years. One word from me and your precious ranch will drown in red tape until you give up." Her voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "I can make things happen or not happen that you cannot even imagine." "Are you threatening to abuse your official position, Barbara? Because that would be highly inappropriate." Too late, she seemed to remember herself, glancing at the security camera mounted on my barn. Her expression shifted instantly, the mask of professionalism sliding back into place. "I am simply stating facts about the complexity of rural zoning regulations," she said loudly for the benefit of the recording. "Now please stay off Vista Ridge property and stop harassing our residents." She retreated to her SUV and drove away, but the damage was done. Her inadvertent confession became the centerpiece of an expanded ethics complaint filed the following day. A leaner added it to our growing file documenting misconduct. More victims began coming forward. My phone rang with calls from property owners as far as 20 miles away who had experienced similar tactics. Each new story reinforced the pattern and strengthened our case. The local radio station picked up the story, interviewing several former landowners who described the pressure they had faced. The chess pieces were in motion, and for the first time since this conflict began, I was no longer simply reacting to Barbara's moves. I was making my own. The County Ethics Committee hearing room hummed with tense anticipation. Every seat was filled. Local residents, reporters, Vista Ridge homeowners, and former property owners who had lost their land to development pressure. At the front of the room, 3 committee members sat behind a long table reviewing their materials. Barbara Wilson entered dressed in a conservative navy suit, her expression professionally neutral despite the circumstances. She nodded to several county employees as she took her seat at the respondents' table. Her attorney, a sharp-featured man from an expensive firm in the state capital, arranged documents with practiced efficiency. I sat with a leaner at the complainant's table, our evidence organized in labeled binders. The Vista Ridge HOA board members who had once backed Barbara so loyally now sat conspicuously distant, having filed statements distancing themselves from her independent actions. The committee chairwoman called the hearing to order. We are here to consider allegations of ethical misconduct, conflicts of interest, and potential